I used to believe every family portrait told the truth. The glossy smiles, the manicured gardens, the grand staircase behind us. It all looked so perfect. But behind those golden frames hung a silence so heavy it could suffocate a child. My name is Hailey Monroe, and I grew up in a mansion on Mount Vernon Street, right in the heart of Beacon Hill, Boston's most exclusive neighborhood. People said my family was the embodiment of success. My father, Charles Monroe, built one of the city's largest real estate empires, and my mother, Margaret, was the face of the Monroe Foundation, always in the papers, always immaculate. To the world, we were what every family wanted to be. To me, we were what every child feared to become. Before I tell you what happened when I chose love over legacy, take a second to like this video, subscribe, and share it with someone who believes family should mean more than appearances. Because trust me, what you're about to hear might change how you see success forever. I was 8 when I first realized that love in our home came with conditions. That evening, my father hosted one of his famous dinner parties: polished silverware, imported wine, guests in pearls and tuxedos. My sister Lydia, 2 years younger, stood beside our mother, reciting French greetings she had practiced for days. Everyone applauded. When it was my turn, I stuttered a little. My mother's smile froze, her fingers tightening around my shoulder. "Stand up straight, Hailey. You're not at the playground," she whispered. Her voice dipped in honey but sharp enough to cut. Later that night, when I showed my father the art ribbon I'd won at school, he didn't even look up from his phone. "Good job," he said absently. The next week, Lydia got a new piano for trying her best. I got silence. That pattern never changed. I learned to measure my worth in glances, one nod of approval for every 10 moments of disappointment. Sometimes I wondered if they even saw me at all. To them, I wasn't a daughter. I was an accessory that didn't quite match the decor. But even then, somewhere deep inside that quiet little girl, a voice whispered, "One day, you'll stop trying to fit their picture. You'll paint your own." And I did, though not in the way any of us expected. By the time I turned 30, I had built a life that was entirely mine, small, quiet, and honest. The kind of life my parents would call uninspired. I live in a modest apartment off Massachusetts Avenue in Cambridge, just a 15-minute train ride from downtown Boston. My father once called this neighborhood transitional, which was his polite way of saying not Beacon Hill, but to me, it felt real. The hum of the Red Line, the smell of roasted coffee from the cafe below my building, the sound of students arguing about philosophy outside Harvard Square, it was imperfect, alive, and beautifully mine. Every morning, I walk 3 blocks to the consulting firm where I work as a financial analyst. It's not glamorous, but I like turning chaos into clarity. I help small businesses manage risk, build budgets, and make choices that actually help people, not just shareholders. Some days, when I leave the office after dark, the Charles River glows under the streetlights, and I feel something I never felt in that Beacon Hill mansion peace. My parents rarely call. When they do, it's usually because they're attending some gala and need to update my professional achievements for the program bio. Once, my mother asked if I could send her a headshot that looks less independent. I laughed, but later, when I hung up, the silence stung more than I wanted to admit. Still, I wouldn't trade this solitude for anything. I cook my own meals, buy my own flowers, and spend Sundays in bookstores instead of charity luncheons. Freedom, I've learned, doesn't come with a trust fund. It comes with choosing yourself, even when no one claps for you. Sometimes, on quiet nights, I'd look out my window toward the city skyline and wonder if there was more to life than balance sheets and self-preservation. I didn't know it yet, but the answer was already on its way, wrapped in a navy blue uniform, holding a wrench, and about to knock on my door. It happened on a Tuesday morning that had started perfectly ordinary coffee, laptop, and a deadline I was determined to meet. Then I heard it, a low groan from the wall, followed by a hiss, and suddenly a stream of icy water burst from the pipe under my bathroom sink, like it had been waiting for the right moment to ruin my life. Of course, I muttered, throwing a towel over the floor that instantly soaked through. The water kept coming, spreading fast across the tile and into my bedroom carpet. I tried the shut-off valve, it wouldn't budge. Within minutes, I was standing ankle-deep in chaos. My landlord didn't answer, so I called the first emergency plumber number I found online. The dispatcher promised someone within an hour. 53 minutes later, a knock. When I opened the door, I expected an older man in overalls. Instead, a tall guy with kind brown eyes and a calm confidence stood there, holding a large toolbox. His navy polo read Brooks Plumbing in clean white letters. "Hailey Monroe?" he asked. "Yeah, bathroom's a mess. Please tell me you can fix it." He smiled, a little crooked but genuine. "Let's see what we're up against." He moved with quiet focus, kneeling by the pipe while I hovered nearby, trying not to stare but completely failing. His hands were steady, his tone patient. "This valve's ancient," he said, twisting it carefully. "Boston apartments are beautiful until they start leaking on you." I laughed despite myself. That sounds like a metaphor. He glanced up. "Maybe." "You'd be surprised what starts leaking when the pressure builds too high." That line hung in the air longer than it should have. As he worked, he asked questions about my job, my favorite books, the city. It wasn't small talk. He actually listened. When I told him I was in financial consulting, he nodded thoughtfully. "So you make sense of numbers that don't like to make sense. Respect." "Something like that," I said, smiling. "And you make sense of pipes that explode." "Also true," he said, tightening the last fitting. "But I have to admit, I like a good puzzle." When the water finally stopped, the room felt suddenly quiet. Too quiet. He stood, wiping his hands. "Everything's under control. I'll send the invoice later, unless you'd prefer to pay in conversation." "There's a coffee place 2 blocks away, best latte in Cambridge." I should have said no. I didn't. "Coffee sounds fair." He grinned. "Deal. And for what it's worth, don't feel bad about calling a plumber. Sometimes even solid foundations need a little fixing." I didn't know it yet, but that leak had just opened something much deeper. I didn't expect to see him again after that flooded morning. But 2 days later, as I walked home from work, I passed the cafe he'd mentioned, Willow and Bean, and there he was, sitting by the window, reading a book on hydraulic engineering like it was poetry. He noticed me instantly and smiled, the kind of smile that made it seem like he'd been waiting. "You owe me coffee, remember?" So I walked in. The cafe smelled like roasted beans and rain-soaked pavement. We found a table near the back, away from the hum of students and startup founders on laptops. "So, how's the plumbing holding up?" he teased. "Completely dry," I said, stirring my latte. "You might have saved me from drowning in bankruptcy." He laughed. "Glad to be of service. Though I have to admit, your sink gave me some ideas." "Ideas?" I asked. He leaned back, eyes thoughtful. "You ever think about how much water we waste without realizing it? Every drop that leaks, every flush, every rinse adds up. I'm working on something to change that." There was a spark in his tone, subtle but unmistakable, the sound of someone talking about what they love. I tilted my head. "So, you invent plumbing solutions now?" "You could say that," he replied, a grin tugging at his lips. "It's a project, kind of a side thing." "Not ready for prime time yet." Something about the way he said it didn't match his easy posture. There was precision behind his words, calculation. "What's it called?" He hesitated, then looked up with that same quiet confidence. "AquaPure Systems. The name's still in testing, like the tech itself. It's designed to recycle water within homes without changing user habits." I blinked. "You mean reuse the same water?" "Not exactly reuse. Filter, repurpose, optimize. Think of it like Tesla for plumbing." He said it so casually I almost missed the brilliance behind it. His fingers traced circles on his cup as he explained pressure sensors, filtration modules, and adaptive valves concepts I didn't entirely understand. but his passion made me lean in closer anyway. "You sound more like an engineer than a plumber," I joked. For a split second, something flickered in his eyes' amusement, maybe a hint of truth. Then he shrugged. "Let's just say I've always liked solving problems. Plumbing's just where the problems are visible." I smiled, not pushing further. Something told me there was more to him than he was ready to share. When we left, the rain had started again, soft and rhythmic. He held the door open for me, and as I stepped outside, he said, "You know, Hailey, most people ignore the little leaks until they turn into floods." "Are we still talking about plumbing?" I asked. He grinned. "Maybe, maybe not." That night, back in my apartment, I found myself thinking about his words and the way he'd looked at the world, like it was a system waiting to be fixed, not a status waiting to be flaunted. He was a mystery wrapped in a navy blue polo, and for the first time in years, I wanted to know more than just the numbers. I didn't know it yet, but that curiosity was about to pull me into the kind of story no spreadsheet could ever calculate. A week after our third coffee date, my mother called. Her tone was unusually warm, which meant one thing: there was an agenda. "Hailey, your father and I are hosting a small dinner on Saturday. Lydia and Bradley will be in town. Why don't you bring your friend?" The pause before friend said everything. Ethan hesitated when I asked him, "You sure that's a good idea?" "No," I admitted, "but it's time they met the man I actually care about, not the one they'd approve of." By the time we reached my parents' brownstone in Beacon Hill, the sun had dipped below the Charles River, and the street lamps glowed against the cobblestones. Inside, everything looked like a magazine-spread crystal glasses, white orchids, music soft and pretentious. My mother greeted us with that trademark smile, warm for the guests, cold for reality. "Ethan, what an interesting profession. Plumbing, wasn't it?" Ethan smiled politely. "Yes, ma'am." "There's beauty in fixing what's broken." Her lips twitched like she'd tasted something bitter. My father joined, his handshake firm but perfunctory. "So, Mr. Brooks, tell me, how's the economy treating the plumbing business?" "It's been flowing pretty well," Ethan said easily. "Everyone needs water, especially when pipes decide to misbehave." Lydia giggled, twirling the diamond bracelet Bradley had just given her. "That's cute. Bradley's in investments. He works with big hotel chains." Bradley leaned back smugly. "Yeah, I manage a lot of international assets. The kind of work that keeps me off the tools, thankfully." My mother laughed, too loudly. My stomach twisted. Dinner was served seared salmon, truffle risotto, and tension thick enough to chew. My father talked about market shares and zoning permits, Bradley about hotel expansions. Ethan listened patiently, never showing discomfort. When my father shifted topics to property maintenance, Ethan asked a few questions that caught him off guard. "Do you guys use pressure sensor valves in your luxury units?" Ethan asked. My father blinked. We leave those details to contractors." "Interesting," Ethan said with a half smile. "You'd be amazed how much efficiency those systems add. Boston's old pipes aren't very forgiving." For a moment, the room went silent. Lydia quickly changed the subject to her Paris shopping trip. When dessert came, my mother lifted her glass. "To family and progress," she said, her eyes flicking to me, "and to finding suitable matches." The words burned more than the wine. Ethan squeezed my hand under the table, steady and calm. "Thank you for dinner, Mrs. Monroe," he said, standing as soon as plates were cleared. "It's been enlightening." On the ride home, I stared out at the city lights, my throat tight. "They'll never see you," I whispered. Ethan looked over, his voice soft but sure. "That's okay. You do. That's all that matters." And in that moment, I realized he wasn't just fixing pipes. He was quietly mending something in me that my family had broken years ago. After that dinner, Ethan and I fell into a quiet rhythm: weekday texts, weekend coffee, the occasional late-night call when his projects ran long. A month passed before he mentioned the name Monroe Developments again. "They reached out," he said one morning over breakfast at my apartment. "Something about a last-minute maintenance issue at their new property Parkside Residences." I nearly choked on my coffee. "That's my father's project. Lydia's fiancé, Bradley, oversees the contracts." Ethan raised an eyebrow. "Then I'll make sure it's perfect." When he arrived on site 2 days later, the place gleamed modern glass panels, rooftop gardens, a lobby that smelled like money and fresh paint. But behind the polished surface, the building groaned with the familiar sounds of rushed construction, humming pumps, uneven pressure, water hammering through old pipes dressed up as new. He crouched near a maintenance hatch, flashlight cutting through the dust. "Huh," he murmured. The valve installation didn't match the schematics. The materials were cheaper, half the durability, a quarter of the price. Someone had swapped the original parts for knockoffs. "Who signed off on this?" he asked the site manager. The man hesitated. That'd be Turner. Bradley Turner. He said it was a cost-efficiency adjustment." Ethan's jaw tightened. He didn't argue. Instead, he asked for copies of the purchase orders. The paperwork was messy, riddled with inconsistencies, units ordered under fake supplier names, inflated invoices routed through shell vendors. Whoever did it thought no one at the plumbing level would notice, but Ethan noticed everything. Later that night, he came by my place, still in his work clothes, eyes sharper than usual. I was grading spreadsheets on the couch when he walked in, dropped a folder on the table, and said quietly, "Hailey, I think your family's project has a problem." I frowned. "What kind of problem?" "The kind that costs millions and smells like fraud." He spread out the documents, each marked with Monroe Developments logo. "Look, here's the approved valve model from the design file, and here's what they actually installed." I leaned closer. "They're not even the same brand." "Exactly. And the invoices go through a middleman company linked to Turner. I traced the supplier, turns out it doesn't exist." My stomach dropped. "Are you saying Bradley's stealing from my family's company?" Ethan sighed, leaning back. "I'm saying he's diverting money through fake procurement. The building's barely functional because half the system's compromised. Someone's going to find out eventually, either an inspector or a flood." I looked at him, torn between disbelief and grim recognition. "My father won't listen to me. He never does." "Then don't tell him," Ethan said simply. "Let me fix the leaks first, literally and legally. I'll collect evidence." Quietly. For the next week, he worked late nights, installing his own discrete sensors miniature prototypes from his Aqua Pure system to track pressure inconsistencies. The data confirmed his theory. Water flow mismatched with billing records. When he finally showed me the report, I stared at it, a mix of pride and dread swirling in my chest. "You could expose them," I whispered. He met my gaze. "I don't want to humiliate anyone, Hailey, but I won't let corruption hide behind luxury." Something in his tone, calm, steady, principled, made me realize he wasn't just trying to protect his work. He was protecting me from the storm he knew was coming. And deep down, I think he already knew this discovery would be the first crack in the Monroe family empire. The invitations arrived the same week. One thick and gold-embossed with calligraphy that shimmered under the light. Lydia Monroe and Bradley Turner, the Ritz-Carlton, Boston, Saturday at 6 p.m. The other was an email draft sitting quietly in my inbox, addressed to a handful of close friends. Hailey and Ethan, Riverside Gardens, Sunday at 4 p.m. 2 sisters, 2 weddings. 2 completely different definitions of love. My mother called as if to rub salt in the contrast. "Darling, Lydia's ceremony will be exquisite. Vogue might cover it. You'll stand out beautifully as her maid of honor. Keep your dress understated, though, so you don't distract." Understated. That was her polite word for invisible. The night of Lydia's rehearsal dinner at the Ritz, Ethan insisted on driving me. The ballroom glittered under chandeliers the size of small cars, champagne flowed like tap water, and Bradley worked the room like a politician handshakes, fake laughs, the perfect future son-in-law. When Lydia walked in wearing a designer gown worth more than my annual salary, everyone rose to their feet. My parents' eyes shone with pride. Ethan squeezed my hand, whispering, "She looks happy. She looks rehearsed," I said quietly. The next day, their wedding unfolded like a magazine spread, 500 guests, imported flowers, a string quartet. My mother cried delicate tears of joy. My father gave a speech about legacy and alignment. Ethan and I stood in the back, clapping politely. Our turn came a month later. No chandeliers, no champagne towers, just an open garden by the Charles River, fairy lights strung between maple trees, and 20 people who actually cared about us. I wore a simple ivory dress. Ethan had built the wooden arch himself. When the music started, Uncle Raymond offered me his arm. "You sure you're ready for this?" he asked. I smiled. I've been ready since the day they said I wasn't enough. When I reached Ethan, everything else faded, the whispers, the expectations, the world beyond that garden. We spoke our vows softly, like promises meant only for two. No photographers, no headlines, just the sound of the wind and the steady rhythm of a love that didn't need to prove itself. And though my parents' seats stayed empty, I didn't feel alone. For the first time in my life, I wasn't performing. I was simply living. The morning of our wedding felt like a dream stitched together with nerves and sunlight. The garden crew was stringing the last of the fairy lights between the trees at Riverside Gardens, and the smell of lilacs carried softly on the wind. I stood inside the small bridal cottage, staring at my reflection, bare shoulders, trembling hands, a heart that wouldn't slow down. Uncle Raymond was waiting outside with his car keys. 10 minutes, kiddo, he said gently. Ethan's already there. I smiled, nodding. Just one quick call. Maybe it was naive, but I wanted one more chance, one last sliver of hope that my parents might show up after all. I dialed my mother's number. She answered on the third ring. "Hailey," she said, her voice clipped, the sound of clinking glasses echoing faintly behind her. "I can't talk long. We're getting ready for the gala." The Boston Charity Gala, of course. The event my parents had been gushing about for weeks. I swallowed hard. "Mom, the ceremony starts in 15 minutes. Please tell me you and Dad are coming." A pause. Then that practiced sigh I knew too well. "Sweetheart, we've been through this. Your father has meetings with the sponsors. It's an important night for us." "More important than your daughter's wedding?" My voice cracked. Silence. Then, cool and deliberate. "You made your choice, Hailey. You decided to marry." "Him." "Him?" I repeated, heat rising in my chest. "His name is Ethan. He's kind, intelligent. He treats me better than anyone ever has." My mother's tone sharpened, sugar turning to steel. "Enjoy marrying your plumber, darling. We won't be embarrassed with you." The words sliced clean through the air. I couldn't even breathe. For a second, all I could hear was the faint chatter of people in the background, her world continuing as mine stopped. "Mom," I whispered, my throat tightening. "This isn't about money or status. It's about love. Isn't that supposed to matter?" Her answer came cold and final. "In our world, love follows success, not the other way around." Then click. I stared at the phone in my hand until my reflection blurred through the tears. Uncle Raymond appeared at the doorway. "They're not coming, are they?" I shook my head. "They're too busy being admired." He sighed, offering his arm. "Then they'll miss seeing what real love looks like." As we drove toward the garden, the city skyline shimmered behind us, the same skyline my parents ruled, the same one they'd chosen over me. I turned off my phone and pressed it into my bouquet. They had made their choice, and for the first time in my life, I was about to make mine without needing their permission. The sun dipped low over Riverside Gardens, painting the sky in soft shades of peach and gold. The air smelled of lilacs and river breeze, and every light strung across the wooden arch flickered like tiny stars waiting for their cue. Uncle Raymond's car rolled to a stop near the garden gate. For a long moment, I couldn't move. The weight of everything, the silence from my parents, my mother's cruel words, the years of trying to be enough pressed on my chest. Uncle Raymond opened my door and offered his hand. "You ready, kiddo?" I swallowed hard. "As ready as I'll ever be." He smiled, eyes warm behind his glasses. "Then let's show them what love looks like when it's real." Music drifted through the garden, the soft strum of a guitar, followed by the first notes of Here Comes the Sun. The guests rose to their feet, all 20 of them, faces full of quiet joy. As I stepped onto the aisle, Uncle Raymond's arm steady beneath mine, I saw Ethan waiting beneath the arch. His suit was simple, his tie slightly crooked, but his expression, his expression was pure calm and love. Every step forward felt like leaving behind the weight of the past. The empty chairs at the front didn't sting as much as I thought they would. In their place, I saw the people who chose to be there, my friends, Ethan's parents, even Mrs. Patel from the cafe where we first met. When I reached him, Ethan's eyes glistened. "You look like a miracle," he whispered. "Just a woman finally walking toward the right life," I said, my voice trembling. The ceremony was short and unpretentious. We exchanged vows we'd written ourselves, his hand never once letting go of mine. When the officiant pronounced us husband and wife, Ethan kissed me softly, and the small crowd erupted into laughter and applause. For the first time in years, I wasn't chasing approval. I was standing exactly where I belonged, in a garden filled with truth, beside a man who saw me long before anyone else did. The night my parents attended the Boston Charity Gala, I was sitting on the porch of a lakeside cabin in Vermont, my wedding dress folded neatly in a suitcase by the door. The lake shimmered under the fading light, and Ethan sat beside me, his arm around my shoulders, 2 mugs of cocoa steaming between us. The silence wasn't empty, it was peaceful, full of everything I'd been missing for years. Meanwhile, 200 miles away, my parents were surrounded by crystal chandeliers, politicians, and socialites. My mother's laughter floated across the ballroom, her gown shimmering silver under the lights. My father was giving a toast, glass raised high. "To progress, partnership, and family values," he declared, blissfully unaware that his speech would age terribly by morning. I imagined them smiling, basking in admiration, convinced they'd made the right choice by skipping my wedding to maintain appearances. Ethan handed me his phone, the screen glowing softly. "You ready?" On it was a photo our friend had taken earlier that day, the 2 of us in front of the arch he'd built, wildflowers in the background, his hand on my waist. Behind us, a simple white banner read, "Congratulations, Ethan Brooks, CEO of Aquapure Systems." I smiled faintly. "Let's send it." He nodded. Just one photo, no words. I attached it to a message and hit send to both of my parents. Then I turned off my phone and set it aside. By the time dessert was served at the gala, the photo had reached them. My mother's hand froze mid-air as she stared at her screen. My father's face drained of color. Around them, the room glittered with laughter, but their world had cracked open publicly, irrevocably. Back at the cabin, Ethan kissed my temple. "No regrets?" he asked softly. "None," I whispered, leaning against him. "For once, the truth doesn't need defending." Outside, the lake reflected the stars, and for the first time, I wasn't trying to shine for anyone but myself. Crystal chandeliers glittered like frozen fireworks above the Boston Charity Gala. Waiters glided between tables draped in white linen, the hum of conversation thick with ego and champagne. At the center table sat Charles and Margaret Monroe, Lydia, and her new husband, Bradley Turner Boston's latest power couple. Charles stood, glass in hand, his smile polished to perfection. "Ladies and gentlemen," he began, tapping his crystal flute, "tonight we celebrate partnership, progress, and family. And I must say my daughter Lydia and her brilliant husband Bradley embody all 3. The crowd applauded as Lydia beamed, her fingers glittering with diamonds. Bradley gave that politician's nod grateful, confident, hollow. Charles continued, warming to his own words. Bradley represents everything we value at Monroe Development's ambition, education, and the right connections to move Boston forward. Margaret dabbed at the corner of her eye, glowing with pride. But the applause was cut short by a collective murmur spreading across the ballroom. Someone's phone buzzed, then another. A ripple of screens lit up in the dim light. One guest whispered, "Isn't this your son-in-law?" showing a news headline. On every phone, the same story appeared. Breaking: AquaPure Systems secures $5 million investment. MIT engineer Ethan Brooks to lead Riverfront District development. The Riverfront District, the very project Monroe Developments had spent years chasing. Charles froze mid-toast, his glass still raised. Bradley's smirk faltered. Margaret's hand trembled, her face drained of color. For the first time that evening, the glittering ballroom went completely silent. The ballroom's golden light fractured against crystal glasses as the murmurs grew louder. Every phone, every tablet, every whisper in the room now revolved around one headline. On the massive LED news wall at the far end of the gala, a red ticker began flashing. Breaking news: AquaPure Systems wins Riverfront District redevelopment contract. MIT engineer Ethan Brooks leads $5 million sustainability partnership with Vertex Capital and the Boston City Council. The LED glow washed across the room like a slow wave of truth. The champagne sparkle dulled. Charles Monroe stood frozen mid-toast, his voice caught somewhere between pride and disbelief. His glass trembled slightly, champagne spilling onto the cuff of his tuxedo. Margaret's painted smile faltered, and Lydia, ever poised, blinked rapidly, as if trying to will the words away. Bradley leaned toward her, whispering sharply, "That's impossible. Monroe Developments had that deal locked months ago." One of the city officials seated nearby looked up from his phone. "Apparently not anymore. The council approved AquaPure's proposal this morning. More efficient systems, cleaner funding, smaller carbon footprint." The phrase "cleaner funding" landed like a slap. Several heads turned toward Bradley, whose jaw twitched. From across the room, a journalist with a press badge whispered to another, "Brooks, isn't that the guy Lydia's sister married? The plumber?" The word spread like wildfire. The plumber. Charles heard it. Everyone did. Bradley straightened, tugging at his collar. "Don't listen to this nonsense. That system's probably a gimmick. No real engineer would waste time on—" Before he could finish, the LED wall switched to live coverage. There was Ethan, standing beside a city official, cameras flashing around him. Calm, confident, his navy suit perfectly fitted, his voice steady. "AquaPure's mission is simple: restore integrity to infrastructure. Clean water should never be a luxury, and sustainability should never be a facade for corruption." The word corruption echoed like a detonator. Charles's grip tightened on his glass until it cracked. Margaret pressed a shaking hand to her chest. Ethan's speech continued. "We're proud to collaborate with Vertex Capital on this initiative. Together, we'll set a new standard for development in Boston's Riverfront District." Then the camera panned, capturing the company banner behind him. AquaPure Systems, with Ethan Brooks, CEO, written boldly beneath. Charles's world tilted. His daughter's husband, whom he'd refused to meet, whom he'd called a plumber with no ambition, had just taken the most coveted project his company had been chasing for years. Around him, polite society began to shift uncomfortably. The same people who had laughed at Ethan at last year's fundraiser now whispered admiration. "I heard he's ex-MIT," one woman murmured. "Married to Charles's other daughter, isn't he?" another replied. "Well, that's poetic." Margaret's eyes glistened, not with pride, but humiliation. "Turn it off," she hissed to a nearby technician. "Turn it off now!" But it was too late. Cameras in the room caught every flicker of their reaction. By midnight, social media would be flooded with headlines. "The plumber who outsmarted Boston's elite." "AquaPure CEO wins Riverfront contract as Monroe Empire falters." In Vermont, Hailey and Ethan were asleep beneath a quilt, unaware that their quiet victory had just gone viral. Back in Boston, under the glare of the LED wall, Charles lowered his broken glass and finally muttered, voice low, raw, and hollow, "My God, it's him." By the next morning, the story of Ethan's victory had already taken over the front pages, but before the Monroes could even begin their damage control, another headline hit, and this one detonated. At 9:47 a.m., the Boston Herald released a breaking update. SEC opens investigation into Turner Capital for fraud and misuse of investor funds. Allegations point to a multi-million-dollar Ponzi scheme. The article hit social media within minutes. By 10:00, Bradley's name was trending across every business platform from Bloomberg to Reddit. Inside Monroe Development's headquarters, panic had replaced the usual calm. Assistants whispered in corners, phones rang endlessly, and Charles sat in his glass office, staring at the glowing screen as if sheer disbelief could make the words vanish. Lydia burst in, clutching her phone, mascara already streaking. "Dad, tell me this isn't real." "Tell me this is some misunderstanding." Charles didn't look up. His voice was quiet, cold. "Where's Bradley?" "I've been calling him all morning," she said, her voice trembling. "He won't pick up." From the adjoining office, Margaret's voice cracked through the air. "The SEC just froze his accounts. They're saying investor money was redirected into shell corporations. Some of them list Monroe Developments as secondary affiliates." Charles's head snapped up. "What?" She nodded shakily, papers trembling in her hand. "The documents are public now. Bradley listed us as guarantors on 3 fraudulent loans. They're connecting his fake companies to our developments." A single word escaped Charles's lips, barely a whisper. "God." Reporters had already started to gather outside the building. Flashbulbs popped against the tinted windows like small explosions. "Mr. Monroe, is it true your son-in-law embezzled investor funds? Was Monroe Developments complicit? Do you plan to resign?" The questions were knives. Lydia slumped into a chair, staring blankly at her phone as more messages poured in, texts from friends who had invested with Bradley, angry voicemails from clients, and one cold statement from the Boston Investors Association. Turner Capital's portfolio is under review. All partnerships with Monroe Developments are suspended pending investigation. Outside, sirens wailed. 2 black SUVs pulled up. The agents from the Securities and Exchange Commission stepped out, crisp suits and unreadable faces. They weren't here for questions. They were here for evidence. When they entered the lobby, the building's energy fractured. An assistant began to cry. Margaret sank into a leather chair, whispering, "This can't be happening." Charles stood, his expression hollow but composed, the posture of a man used to controlling disasters, but not this one. "Get the legal team on the line," he ordered. "No statements to the press until we know the full scope." But deep down, he already knew. That night, while Lydia hid in her apartment and Margaret avoided every call, Charles sat alone in his study. The TV murmured faintly from across the room, replaying clips of Bradley being escorted from his downtown office in handcuffs. The anchor's voice was merciless. Authorities report Turner Capital operated as a long-term Ponzi scheme, funneling investor money through real estate ventures, including properties under Monroe Developments. The SEC confirms that over $40 million in funds are unaccounted for. Charles stared blankly at the screen, the words blurred. For a man who had built his life on control, reputation, and precision, this was a kind of death. Margaret appeared in the doorway, her face pale and tear-streaked. "It's all over the news, Charles. Everyone's talking about us." He turned slowly, his voice breaking for the first time. "Not us, Margaret." "You heard them. They're saying him and our name next to his." She sank beside him, whispering, "What do we do now?" Charles exhaled a bitter laugh that didn't sound human. "Now?" "We pay for the company we keep." Outside, Boston glittered as if nothing had changed. But inside the Monroe household, every light felt colder, every silence heavier. And somewhere in a quiet cabin in Vermont, Hailey and Ethan were still blissfully unaware that the truth they'd built on honesty had just shattered the empire built on lies. By Monday morning, Boston woke up to chaos. Every local news station led with the same footage: Bradley Turner in handcuffs, his once perfect smile erased under fluorescent lights as federal agents guided him down the courthouse steps. Turner Capital accused of running a multi-million-dollar Ponzi scheme. Dozens of investors defrauded, including members of Boston's elite. Monroe developments linked through subsidiary partnerships. The headlines rolled in waves, each one sharper than the last. By noon, the story had spread nationwide. CNBC analysts called it the fall of Boston's real estate royalty. Outside the Monroe headquarters, reporters swarmed the sidewalk. Cameras flashed, microphones thrust forward, voices colliding. "Mr. Monroe, did you know about the fraud? Mrs. Monroe, did your daughter's husband use company funds for his scheme? Are you stepping down from the Riverfront project?" Charles tried to maintain composure, flanked by 2 PR consultants and a security guard, but his face looked drained, almost translucent under the glare. Margaret wore sunglasses despite the cloudy sky, her hand trembling as she waved off the questions. One reporter shouted, "Is it true your other son-in-law, Ethan Brooks, has taken over the Riverfront contract you lost?" That question stopped them both cold. The cameras zoomed in. Margaret's mouth opened slightly, but no sound came out. Inside the building, the lobby that once gleamed with glass and ambition now looked like a crime scene of reputations. Employees avoided eye contact. A half-dozen investors waited grimly in the conference room, their voices rising behind closed doors. 40 years of trust, Charles, gone in 48 hours. One man shouted. Another hissed, "You vouched for Turner! You let him into the boardroom!" Charles stood motionless, his knuckles white against the table. "I didn't know," he said quietly. "None of us did." "Then you were blind," the investor snapped. "And blindness isn't a defense. It's negligence." When the meeting ended, the board voted unanimously to suspend all external operations until further notice. The company's stock had already dropped 20% by closing bell. At home, Margaret sat in the living room surrounded by newspapers, her hands buried in her hair. The TV replayed footage of the Gallagher smiling face frozen mid-laugh as the LED wall behind her flashed the words, "Aqua Pure Winds Riverfront District." She grabbed the remote and hurled it across the room. "They're mocking us, Charles! The whole city!" Charles sank into the armchair opposite her, loosening his tie. "They're not mocking us," he said hollowly. "They're finally seeing who we really are." Margaret turned toward him, stunned. "What's that supposed to mean?" He stared at the fireless fireplace, voice low. "We spent decades worshipping appearances, money, status, family names. And now, we've built our empire on people like Bradley, empty men who looked perfect on paper." Margaret's eyes filled with tears. "He was supposed to secure our legacy." "He did," Charles said bitterly, "just not the way we expected." Across town, Lydia refused to leave her apartment. Reporters camped outside her building, flashes of light bursting through the blinds every few seconds. She sat on the floor, her wedding ring beside her, unread texts piling up on her phone. When she finally turned on the TV, the screen showed her husband's mugshot next to a banner reading, "Turner Capital Collapse. Families of victims demand justice." Her breath hitched. In the corner of the segment, a smaller headline scrolled Aquapure's CEO, Ethan Brooks, praised for ethical innovation and transparency. The irony was too cruel to ignore. By sunset, the Monroe's mansion in Beacon Hill stood quiet. The same house that once hosted galas, fundraisers, and glittering dinners was now surrounded by news vans and flashing lights. Charles pulled the curtains closed, his voice breaking for the first time in years. "Margaret, they're saying the word disgraced. Do you know how many years it takes to erase that word? She didn't answer. She was staring at a framed photo on the mantel, her two daughters, smiling side by side at a family picnic years ago. One had married power, the other had chosen love. And as the cameras outside flickered like judgmental stars, Margaret finally whispered the truth neither of them wanted to say out loud. We raised them to chase everything, except happiness. It had been 3 weeks since the scandal broke. Ethan and I had just finished dinner when the intercom buzzed. I wasn't expecting anyone. When the screen lit up, I froze. My parents stood in the lobby of our Cambridge apartment building, looking like ghosts who hadn't slept in days. Should we? Ethan asked quietly. I hesitated, then nodded. Let them up. When they entered, the room seemed smaller, the air heavier. My father was in a wrinkled suit, my mother still wearing pearls, but missing the usual confidence that came with them. She clutched a large envelope in one hand and a gift bag in the other. Hailey, she began, voice too bright. You look wonderful. Marriage suits you. Mom? I kept my tone neutral. Why are you here? Charles cleared his throat. We wanted to congratulate you both properly. We owe you that. He set the envelope on the coffee table. A belated wedding gift. The penthouse on Tremont Street, it's yours. Fully paid. I blinked, unsure whether to laugh or cry. You came here to buy forgiveness? Of course not, my mother said quickly, her fingers trembling as she reached for her tea. We simply want to make things right, and perhaps discuss something mutually beneficial. Ethan leaned back, calm but unreadable. Such as? Charles clasped his hands together. We're rebuilding Monroe Development's cleaner, more transparent. Your technology, Ethan Aquapure, would elevate our next phase. We'd like to partner. There it was, the real reason. I exhaled slowly, anger tightening in my chest. You didn't come here for family. You came for business. That's not fair, my mother protested, tears welling. We've lost everything, our reputation, our friends. Because of choices you made, I interrupted. Because you valued image over integrity. And now you're here, not because you've changed, but because you've realized the people you looked down on are the ones still standing. Silence filled the room. Ethan's hand brushed mine under the table, steady and sure. Keep the penthouse, I said quietly. We don't need it. And as for your partnership, prove you've learned what transparency means before asking us to build something with you. My father's jaw tightened. My mother's eyes dropped. They both stood slowly, defeated. As the door closed behind them, Ethan whispered, You did the right thing. For the first time in my life, I truly believed him. The next morning, sunlight poured through the kitchen windows, soft and golden, but my thoughts were anything but calm. The white envelope still sat on the counter where my parents had left it, like a ghost that refused to leave. Ethan came up behind me, his arms brushing mine. You haven't opened it. I don't need to, I said quietly. I already know what's inside. He studied my face for a moment, then nodded. Then maybe it's time to give it back. A few hours later, I found myself standing in front of the old Monroe mansion in Beacon Hill, the same house where I'd once been told a plumber wasn't good enough for me, the same house where love had always been conditional. Margaret opened the door. Her expression softened when she saw me, like she'd been hoping I'd come. Hailey, sweetheart, please, come in. I stepped into the foyer, the familiar scent of roses and polished wood wrapping around me like a memory I didn't want. My father appeared a moment later, tie loosened, exhaustion etched into every line on his face. You didn't have to come all the way here, he said gruffly. I did, I replied, placing the envelope on the table between us. I came to return this. Margaret blinked. Hailey, that penthouse was meant as a gift. It's not a gift, I interrupted gently but firmly. It's a transaction, and I'm not for sale. Her face fell. My father looked away, jaw tightening. I don't want anything from you, I continued, my voice steady despite the sting in my throat. Not the apartment, not the partnership, not the apology you think can fix this overnight. Trust isn't bought, Dad. It's rebuilt, slowly, painfully, through actions that mean something. For a long moment, the only sound was the faint ticking of the grandfather clock. Margaret's lips trembled. We just wanted to make things right. Then start by meaning it, I said softly. Start by listening. Start by being honest with each other, with Lydia, with yourselves. I turned toward the door, pausing just long enough to add, you don't have to prove you can be perfect anymore. Just prove you can be decent. As I walked out into the cold Boston air, I felt lighter, not because I'd won, but because I'd finally stopped needing to. It was late afternoon when I heard the knock. Soft, hesitant like someone unsure they deserved to be heard. When I opened the door, Lydia stood there. Her once polished image was gone. No makeup, no designer coat, just a wrinkled sweater and eyes that looked years older than her age. For a moment, neither of us spoke. Can I come in? She asked finally, her voice small, almost fragile. I stepped aside silently. She sat at the edge of the couch, clutching a mug I'd handed her, but not drinking it. Her hands trembled slightly. I've been trying to find the words, she began. But the truth is, I don't even know where to start. Start anywhere, I said softly. Lydia took a deep breath. I knew something was wrong with Bradley. I didn't know the full extent, but I ignored it. The missing invoices, the fake investor meetings. I told myself he was stressed. I didn't want to believe the man I married was capable of what he did. And I didn't want to see the truth because it was easier to live in the illusion. Her voice cracked. When the news broke, everyone looked at me like I was part of it. And maybe I was, because silence is a kind of complicity, isn't it? I watched her eyes brim with tears, the guilt raw and unfiltered. For years, Lydia had been the one who had everything I didn't. Approval, luxury, love that looked perfect from the outside. But in this moment, I saw her stripped bare, just a woman trying to survive the wreckage of her own choices. Lydia, I said gently, what you went through, no one deserves that. But forgiveness doesn't start with excuses. It starts with honesty, and you've finally done that. She let out a shaky laugh, tears spilling freely. You're still the better sister. No, I whispered. I just learned my lessons earlier. Ethan appeared in the doorway then, offering her a kind smile. You can stay here for a while if you need to, he said. Lydia looked between us, her lip quivering. After everything I did to both of you, you'd really let me stay? Ethan shrugged lightly. Everyone deserves a place to start over. For the first time in a long time, Lydia nodded, her tears no longer from shame, but from the faint, fragile relief of being seen. 1 year later, Boston had changed, and so had we. The headlines about scandal had long faded, replaced by new stories of rebuilding and redemption. Ethan's company, Aquapure, had grown beyond anything we'd imagined. The Riverfront project stood completed, a model for sustainable living, with his technology now taught in engineering programs across the country. That morning, we stood on the steps of MIT's Alumni Hall, where a small ceremony was taking place. A new plaque gleamed under the spring sun. The Monroe Brooks Scholarship Fund, supporting students in ethical engineering and sustainable innovation. My parents had created it with Ethan, a gesture of restitution rather than reputation. The condition had been simple, and mine. The fund would bear our names equally, not theirs alone. As the dean thanked everyone, I caught my mother's eyes across the courtyard. Margaret looked smaller now, humbled but softer. My father stood beside her, silent but steady, his hands clasped in front of him. After the ceremony, he approached. You were right, Hailey, he said quietly. Trust isn't bought, it's built. Thank you for giving us a chance to start rebuilding. I nodded, my voice gentle. It's not about erasing the past, Dad. It's about learning from it. Lydia joined us, smiling faintly. She'd moved back to Boston a few months earlier, working with a local nonprofit that helped women restart their careers. Watching her greet one of Ethan's interns, I realized she was finally becoming herself, not someone's reflection. Later that afternoon, Ethan wrapped an arm around me as we walked along the Charles River. The skyline shimmered in the distance, calm and new. "You know," he said softly, "you changed more than just your family, Hailey. You changed what legacy means." I leaned against him, the air filled with the scent of spring and renewal. "Maybe legacy was never about the name," I murmured. "Maybe it's about what you leave in people's hearts after you're gone." And for the first time, that felt enough. Looking back, I used to think strength meant fighting louder, proving my worth to people who never saw it. But I learned that real strength is quieter. It's walking away without resentment, rebuilding without revenge, and forgiving without forgetting. I learned that family isn't defined by blood or last names. It's defined by honesty, by accountability, and by love that doesn't demand perfection in return. Sometimes the people who break you also teach you what it means to heal. And sometimes forgiveness isn't about letting them back into your life. It's about freeing yourself from the weight of who they expected you to be. If my story means anything, I hope it reminds you that you can start over no matter where you came from or who doubted you. Trust takes time. Healing takes courage. But both are worth the wait. And maybe, just maybe, redemption isn't something you're given. It's something you build one honest choice at a time. If this story touched your heart, please like, subscribe, and share it with someone who needs hope today. And tell me in the comments, what does forgiveness mean to you?